Decisions.
America decides.
Financial decisions.
I stand squarely behind my decision.
Some choices are small. What to wear,
These or these?
espresso or latte, but some choices are really rather large and could affect us for years to come. Imagine if each time you made a decision, you felt confident it was the very best one. So when making decisions, should we think short term or long term? On the face of it, the answer seems obvious, isn't it? Short term bad, long term good. Or is there a bit more to it than that? You see, the whole short-term thinking versus long-term thinking debate is really a story about two characters that loom large in our lives who are in constant, unending conflict. And this is a story about their struggle and who comes out on top. And what we'll discover is that this isn't a typical story of short-term bad, long-term good. Rather, short-term versus long-term thinking represents a false choice, and that we should explore better ways to balance these two seemingly contradictory ideas. Let's take a look. One way to judge whether a choice is a good one is to play out the consequences through different time horizons. The two most common time horizons are often characterised as short-term, an ambiguous term referring loosely to the next 12 months, but could be as little as the next 12 seconds, and long-term, that spans any time that isn't short-term until the end of eternity. But both can play an important role in informing the choices and actions we take. So I want to start this story about short-term versus long-term thinking by introducing you to a fictional friend of ours. Let's call him Chris. Chris is in his mid-30s, has a good but challenging job as a director in a London-based firm, has a young family with 2 kids, and when he has time, which is rarely, he loves to read, tinkle the ivories and cook. He's conscientious and cares about the world around him, but he feels like he has a lot on his plate right now. Responsibilities at work and to his young children growing up and to his parents growing old make him increasingly aware that his choices matter. Not just for today, but for the long term, and he knows that he doesn't always get those choices right, but he's at a point in life where he really feels that the future is at stake. So Chris just wants to make better decisions to build a better future for himself and for the people that he cares about. But there's something standing in his way. It's a battle between the desires, wishes and needs of two competing characters. First there is short-term Chris and his demands and desires in the near present. Dropping his kids off at kindergarten on time, work deadlines he has to meet today, catching up on the sleep he didn't get again last night. Second is long-term Chris and his needs and wishes for the father future, his health, relationships, career and financial security, but also for those around him, his partner, his children, his own parents. And he's a conscientious guy too. So he cares about the state of the wider world. In the choices he takes in everyday life, Chris faces an epic battle between these two characters as he seeks to reconcile their competing needs and wishes. But the playing field for this battle isn't level. This is because the short term holds some unfair advantages over Chris's decision making. For starters, to decide to delay our reward to another time in the future, known as intertemporal decision making, requires him to overcome his natural inclination for the present. And this isn't easy. All of our minds are wired with a natural bias towards the present over some abstract future. But it gets worse. Like you and I, Chris is surrounded by distractive technologies and short-sighted business targets and politics operating on 24-hour news cycles. And all these forces pin his attention into a tiny territory of time in the here and now. And all of this short-termism is a problem. After all, important questions shaping Chris's life, work and concerns for the wider world require him to look through a longer-term lens. Now, highlighting the scourge of short-termism is nothing new. It has most often been closely associated with corporate behaviour, with its quarterly reporting incentivising the pursuit of near-term financial targets over investment towards more rewarding long-term objectives. But what's interesting is the uptick in concern for how short-term thinking is posing problems elsewhere for the way we run our lives, organise our societies and care for our planet. Just check out these recently published books, and if there were just one or two, then you could probably dismiss the issue as being a bit fringe, but when there are this many titles being published, I think we intuitively as well as analytically sense that short-term thinking is problematic. Chris senses this as well. But hang on, short-term Chris isn't all bad. As Dory Clark notes in her book Playing the Long Game, short-term thinking does have its uses, particularly in a crisis. It allows us to be nimble and agile to respond with swift decisions to rapidly evolving and changing environments. Short-term thinking also allows us to spot threats and opportunities that arise unexpectedly. So if we accept that not all short-term thinking is bad, what we're really talking about is spotting and eliminating harmful short-termism. Here we cut to a quote from Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca that Chris likes to quote from time to time. Enjoy present pleasures in such a way as to not injure future ones. So what Seneca is saying is, enjoy life, but avoid the kind of short-term whimsical desires that limit your options and room for manoeuvre in the future. Which brings us to our saviour, the second character in our story, long-term thinking Chris. Long-term Chris enjoys a whole list of documented benefits just by virtue of his thinking about the future. For example, thinking about the future helps Chris to make smarter decisions, can encourage and motivate him towards his goals, and even serve to give his overall sense of well-being a bit of a boost. But is there another, more harmful side to long-term thinking when taken to extremes? In the same way that a fixation on the short term can blind Chris to the threats and opportunities in the future, a fixation on the long term can lead him to ignore his near-term needs. After all, any business needs cash to stay afloat, any person needs to respond to their body's dynamic needs for food, water, rest and shelter. Also, life for long-term Chris with his head in the future disconnects him from what's right here in the present and the people that are important to him. And there's another problem with a stubborn focus on the long term. I call it the Scrooge trap. The Scrooge trap is where we simply choose the wrong long-term goal. We select and obsess over a long-term goal that we pursue to the detriment of all else, only to realise that what we've been fixated on wasn't what we really wanted after all. So where does this leave our friend Chris? On the one hand, fixating on the short term blinds him to the potential harm he's storing up for the future. And let's not forget, our default setting is to prioritise the present over the future. But if he were to fully embrace long-term thinking, he risks underplaying and ignoring real dangers in the present. So how can we help Chris? One idea for achieving a better temporal balance and to gently encourage a little more long-term thinking is to remember to do it. So let's try it with time spectacles. Certain decisions in life demand a longer-term perspective. So how about Chris puts on his long-term vision spectacles when making decisions about big purchases, whether to accept that new job in New York or which school to send his children to. These choices have obvious cascade effects into the future. Let's say Chris is offered a new position in New York. It's a great professional opportunity, but it will uproot his partner and children with both short and long-term implications. So, to evaluate the options, he decides to look at the opportunity through a variety of time spectacles, each representing different time horizons. And let's say he begins by looking through a pair of long-term spectacles. And then, as he considers the steps he'll need to take towards his long-term vision, he can change to his short-term spectacles to spot threats and opportunities that might arise along the way. The only problem is that time spectacles chop up time, parcel and package it into neat, distinct places. And this can give the misleading impression that things that happen at different times are somehow unconnected and separate when in fact they're not. So if jumping between short and long term holds limitations, what's next for Chris? A first step for Chris is to take his short-term plans and his long-term plans and bring them together to explore how they interrelate. Next is for him to adopt the idea of being more timeful, a kind of mindfulness as it relates to our perception of time. And this is an idea from the geologist Marcia Bjornerund in her book Timefulness. Timefulness is a form of time literacy. It's about getting comfortable with holding in mind both short and long-term consequences of our actions to become, in her words, polytemporal. I think Chris will enjoy thinking about time in a more fluid and multi-layered way. And perhaps being more timeful will reveal to Chris how time is interconnected and interdependent. His work of today builds towards his vision of tomorrow. It's a way to move beyond the binary idea of short-term bad, long-term good, sometimes characterised as exploit and explore. Timefulness offers us all a more relevant and connected sense of time that more truthfully reflects our experience. Yes, we are driven by grand plans and visions. These are our long-term projects, but I believe that there's still an important place for short-term thinking beyond hosing down fires and managing crises. After all, instant gratification is part of being human. Not only is it a natural instinct that will take a lot of energy for you and I and Chris to resist, it also draws us towards things that catch our eye, amazing art, or catch our ear, exquisite music, or capture our imagination, simple and elegant ideas. And these things enrich our lives every day. So I personally don't wish to erase short-term completely from my life. It just sounds exhausting and would make for a rather dull life. And as for our friend Chris, timefulness offers him a better way to make his choices today by seeing how they are deeply embedded and connected to the future in many ways over time. For more ideas to challenge the way you think about time and the future, check out this playlist here. Thanks for watching. If you aren't already, hit the subscribe button and I'll see you over in the next video.